Well, once again, it's great to see familiar faces, people that we haven't seen for a long, long time. Glad that you guys came up for the reunion and that you had great weather this week. It was the Woodrow reunion, and as I mentioned, the Hintons are trickling their way in town, so we're like overtaking the town of Somerset here. It's pretty awesome. It's encouraging. So we've been going through a theme for the past year. I do themes because I'm just so scatterbrained that I have to have a theme to stick to, or else I'm just all over the place. But our theme this year is that the heart of man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps. Proverbs 16:9. We need to have plans. We have to have a plan. Those plans often change, but we need to know where we're going. But ultimately, it's God who establishes our steps. And that's why plans change continually. We're talking about a process of loving our neighbors, getting into the lives of our neighbors, loving them, moving them to loving God, getting them to worship and teaching them who God is and how to fall in love with God, and teaching the commands of God, and then moving them and moving each other to serving others, to getting into the lives of our neighbors and people who are really struggling. I love this congregation because the heart of this congregation has always been to reach into the lives of people who are hurting and who are struggling. There are often times where this congregation struggles with poverty. We go through kind of waves of ups and downs, and I think that's probably been historically. But one of the neat things is that looking back at the history of this congregation, it has always stepped up to the plate when people are in need. And it's really cool and it's really encouraging to be a part of a congregation that does that. Again, our verses for today comes from 1 Corinthians 15, verses 56 through 58. The sting of death is sin, and the power of sin is the law. But thanks be to God, who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. Therefore, my beloved brothers, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labor is not in vain. I want to introduce you to somebody here. You may or may not have ever heard of Jack C. Taylor. He recently died at the age of 94. Jack Taylor, back in the 50s, was just kind of struggling and had a car dealership. And there was this new idea to lease cars out to people. Instead of selling cars, you would lease them for a time and then get them back. And so then people started entertaining this idea, and they're like, well, maybe we should rent cars out to people. A lot of people didn't like that idea. Jack Taylor specifically really didn't like that idea. He came back and he said, we sell cars, we don't lease cars. We don't rent cars. We sell them, we lease them, we don't rent them. But then all these companies started renting cars out. And so Jack Taylor said, well, you know what? I'm going to start renting cars too. Well, by the time that he started renting cars, he was really behind the curve because everybody was doing it. So he had 17 cars that he began with. And he said, you know, I'm going to make it about an experience. When people come to rent from me, I'm going to be kind to them. I'm going to be courteous. And it's not going to be about the transaction. It's going to be about building relationships with people. So he began to do that, and people would rent from him, and then they would come back due to his friendliness and his kindness, and he always made people feel comfortable, and they would come in and they would sit down. When he began, he would let the phone ring a few extra times to give the impression that they were really busy. So customers would call, and he would every single time let it ring a few times before he would pick up the phone. Jack C. Taylor named his business after the warship the World War II warship that he served on as a pilot. He named it after the USS Enterprise. Jack Taylor was approached by Warren Buffett to purchase Enterprise, and Jack just kind of laughed and he said, your money's not worth what my business is worth. And Warren Buffett says that was one of the greatest decisions that Jack Taylor ever made because he began to build the business even more. And now Enterprise is worth more than every single car rental service combined in the world. But he began with consistency and friendliness, building a place that was hospitable to other people. I think it's really encouraging. I've been talking to a lot of people recently that are really successful at businesses. I mentioned in class today that I talked to a woman this past week who began just a few years ago with $150, less than $200, literally, was all she had to her name. In a rundown car, and she built this business. She began working for this woman for just a couple years, 2-3 years, and then this woman said, I'm thinking about selling the business, would you be interested? She ended up deciding to do it. She bought the business right when COVID started. And so it was put her in a really, really vulnerable position. And she ended up purchasing the business and thriving throughout COVID. And I said, what made you really successful? And she said, well, a handful of things. But she said, number one, I trusted God and loved God with all my heart, mind, soul, and strength. She said, I knew that God would take care of me. As long as I was committed and faithful to him, God would bless this endeavor. And if I did my part of loving my neighbors. So she said, every customer who came in, I decided to build for them a really good, personable experience. Sounds a little familiar, doesn't it? It's kind of the same model that Jack Taylor adopted. And so now she is just a couple months away from paying off this multi-million-dollar business that she bought. And she said her profit margin is absolutely through the roof. It's highly successful because she's committed and she trusts in God. I want to introduce you to another couple. Some of you may recognize this couple here on the screen. This was Pop Woodrow. And what's fascinating about this picture here, to me, is I look at the times up there. Do you see that Bible study starts at 10 o'clock, worship at 10:30? That's a short class. I feel a little bit long-winded. But this is interesting because there's a lot of history at this congregation, and I love history. We celebrated our 100-year history back in 2016 was our 100-year anniversary. And so I did a lot of history, and I looked up a lot of history on this congregation, and it's just fascinating to me. And so Pop Woodrow came in 1920. He began here, right in the middle of all kinds of crazy stuff that was happening. It was the women's suffrage. It was also the Prohibitionist Act. Those were back-to-back, 1919 and 1920. And so he started in the middle of this really uncertain time. I mean, a lot of volatility in this nation at the time, a lot of division in the nation at the time, a lot of excitement in the nation at the time. There was a whole lot going on. And the one thing he was committed. And this congregation has planted other congregations and interacted with other congregations. And we talk about Sarah and Zelda, and it's fantastic the two of you are here. But Sarah, with you being here, we have, I did the math, and if I'm right, we have 103 years of commitment and faithfulness to this congregation represented here, just between your parents and yourself. And the impact that you've had on me and my family and people in this congregation and way beyond this congregation, people who are out there raising Christian families is tremendous. And it's not lost on us. Sarah, I think I see you in that mix somewhere there. You guys may recognize the location here. That's here, actually right below where I'm standing. Back when we had all the old pews before we moved to chairs. But it's so cool and it's so interesting. And we've seen so much go on. Lives have been changed. Here is the last time that Bill was in Haiti. There's a lot of history here. Bill and Mary Ann's commitment to Haiti and what you guys have done and the influence that you've had on us is tremendous. Tremendous. And it's just that faithful plugging away and commitment to serve and to say, you know what, like things are falling apart and there's so much volatility and so much going on, but we're going to be committed to serve. And we're going to keep our roots planted in Haiti, and we're going to keep serving people. Incidentally, Tim's here with us. Yesterday, was the, how many year? That was 2019, 3-year anniversary of their tragic accident in Haiti. We were on our way back from Ecuador when Tim was taking a team to Haiti. This trip to Haiti was just a couple months prior to that, which Eden is in the picture. You can see there was much smaller at the time. It was this trip that sparked a tremendous passion inside of Eden to provide clean drinking water for people in Haiti. She came back and talked to me about it. Then, it was a little bit later. I kind of mentioned it in passing to Bill, and Bill came to life. There was a spark inside of Bill when he found out that Eden was interested in raising money for a well. He said, I'm going to make it happen for her. And it was that day I received an email from Healing Hands International saying, hey, I heard that you're interested in planning a well, and Eden wants to kind of lead this charge. We're here to help you. We successfully raised $7,500 for that well. I found out later on that Bill was kind of priming the pump along the way. He would check on the funds, and he was getting so excited that he couldn't help himself, and he would trickle in, $100 here, a couple $100 there. And in the meantime, within 30 days, we raised $7,500. And I got word back that we had this well drilled in Gantier, Haiti, out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, a little tiny village outside of Cap-Haïtien, way outside of Cap-Haïtien. They put this well in one of the neediest areas in the whole country of Haiti, one of the most desperate. They have problems with these wells hitting dry holes, and so they have to keep drilling. And sometimes they don't find water. Well, they finally hit water in Gantier, Haiti. Last Sunday, to my surprise, we had a couple here from Haiti who now live an hour and a half away. And they said, we've been watching the online services, and we found out that you guys put a well in Haiti, and we wanted to personally drive there to worship with you guys because the well is in my hometown of Gantier, Haiti. And we can't thank you enough for putting a well in Gantier, Haiti. We wanted to keep this going. And so last year we raised another $7,500, and we said, put it in the most desperate place where they need a well. And that well went in Zimbabwe. And Marianne, I actually have a book for you. This was given by Healing Hands International. They gave us 2 copies, one for Eden, one for you. And that is a well that was done in memory of Bill Riggs. A few months after Bill died, back in November of 2020, our dear friend Mike Leck died. Dave and Bill and Mike Leck and I were usually like the gang of 4 that would go out. We would have breakfast every Thursday. Mike tragically died because of declining health. And I contacted Lisa just a few days ago, and Healing Hands said, do you want to do another well in memory of somebody? The first person I thought of was Mike Leck. And so I talked to Lisa. Lisa said, Mike would be so honored to have a well in his name. This year we're raising another $7,500 to put a well wherever in the world they need a well the most through Healing Hands International, and it will be in memory of Mike Leck. Every year, this congregation will help, with the help of Marianne, we will help drill another well. Cameron's not here today with us, but Cameron, in his excitement through all this raising funds, says, well, why are we only doing one well? And so me and Natalie kind of took a deep breath, and we said, well, we pretty easily raise money for one well. Should we begin expanding that and trusting God and saying, let's do 2 wells a year? So we're in the process of kind of thinking through that, but I think it's certainly attainable. But my point is, what wins the day is consistency. And consistency often is boring. And I've quoted Bill probably 100 times, and I'll quote him 1,000 more. Bill would often say, there's nothing glamorous about serving in the church. He said there's no excitement and there are no bells and whistles. He said sometimes it's just about rolling up your sleeves and you grit your teeth and you just do the hard work. And that summed up Bill's life, and Bill has passed that on, and that passion to serve, he's passed it on to generations, including my own children, and generations and generations. You guys have more of an impact than you'll ever know. All of us do. And so we come back to our passage, and I'm going to back up just a little bit before I reread this and end on these verses. Paul's addressing the church in Corinth. Corinth was a hot mess. They were highly divided. They were fighting amongst themselves. They were getting drunk during the Lord's Supper. It was an absolute mess. Rather than Paul giving up on the church, Paul focuses on the kingdom. Paul focuses on eternity. And Paul says, you guys have got to shift your focus and you've got to think about what you could be doing. You guys are influencing people for bad. You need to be influencing them for good. And here's what Paul says. He says, I tell you this, brothers, flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God. In other words, stop chasing all these fleshly things. Stop chasing all these worldly things. Nor does the perishable inherit the imperishable. Behold, I tell you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall be changed. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised imperishable, and we shall be changed. For this perishable body must put on the imperishable, and this mortal body must put on immortality. When the perishable puts on the imperishable, and the mortal puts on immortality, then shall come pass the saying that is written, death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where's your victory? O death, where's your sting? And then he picks up with this verse here. The sting of death is sin, and the power of sin is the law, but thanks be to God who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. Therefore, my beloved brothers, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labor is not in vain. I'd like to think that like the Woodrows who have passed on before us, and for other people of this congregation who served faithfully for years and years and years, I would like to think that they rested well knowing that their labor was not in vain. And I can stand here today and tell you that labor was not in vain. I can tell you, as somebody who grew up in this congregation who came back to it, and now we're seeing the generational impact. Tim is an elder at his congregation in Nashville. These impacts go on and on and on, and Christian families raise Christian families, and we go out and we serve. The work that Tim and Wendy do in Haiti is absolutely phenomenal, and I know I should have gotten your permission to say it. I don't want to embarrass anybody, but these guys do a ton of work in Haiti and beyond. These impacts that you guys have on people are not in vain. We've all got to be consistent in our faith and teach people to serve, not just out there on their own, but serve beside us. Take them on trips, on mission trips. Let them see the sights and smell the smells and feel the pain that people have in their life, because that ignites something inside of our children. We've got to stop sheltering people from serving people who are in need. We've got to link arms with people from the time they're really young and show them what it looks like to do ministry. And when we do that, people are blessed and our labor is not in vain. I'm excited to see the direction of where this congregation is going and will continue to go. We've had a lot of years of ups and downs, and that's so typical of small churches. But we're looking into our community, and we just talked about it in class today. There are so many needs right now in our community that this congregation, I feel like, is really equipped to be able to reach into those hurts and those needs and to bless people. That's the message today. Go out and bless people and know that your labor will not be in vain. If there's anybody this morning who's not yet taken the step to put Christ on in baptism, or anybody who has prayer needs, we'd invite you to come up. We're all going to stand and sing a song together, then we'll take communion together.